So Prime Minister Scott Morrison has arrived back in the country after the G20 summit in Argentina and flown straight into a political storm. His predecessor Malcolm Turnbull has launched an extraordinary intervention advising Mr Morrison to call an early election and calling on the party to stand firm in the face of threats from a backbencher. Political reporter Matthew Doran joins us now from Parliament House in Canberra. So Matt, take us through what Malcolm Turnbull has had to say.
So the former Prime Minister was walking to the ferry in Sydney this morning when some friendly camera crews dropped by to ask him his thoughts after, first of all, some extraordinary tweets last night with regards to a pre-selection battle, but then his comments on ABC Radio National this morning saying that the government should go to an early election. He says that while he was Prime Minister, the plan was to go to an election on the 2nd of March. And he says since that leadership turmoil back in August where he lost the nation's top job and the fighting that's been happening since, it's been a clear reflection of public sentiment through things like the Wagga Wagga by-election at a New South Wales state level, the Wentworth by-election caused by his resignation at a federal level, and the Victorian state election, that the coalition is on the nose with voters, in particular the Liberal Party, because of that infighting. He says that if the current Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, was to call an early election for that same period, it would give Gladys Berejiklian, the New South Wales Liberal leader, hoping to remain Premier after their state election in late March, some clear air, and it would mean that her electoral hopes aren't hampered by the infighting that's happened in Canberra. As I mentioned, he was on his way to the ferry this morning in Sydney when he made a few comments to the media.
I am very concerned that this will put at risk the Berejiklian Government. So from the point of view of a very good state government with real achievements and a terrific track record, it would be better if the federal government were to go before the 23rd of March. Now, as it happens, my intention as Prime Minister was to go to the polls on the 2nd of March, so in effect straight after the summer holidays.
Exactly when that election date will be is a matter for the Prime Minister. That's for him to determine. That's our custom in Australia. It's the way our electoral laws, our constitution all works. So that will happen then. I expect it will be in clear circumstances where the Australian people will be able to make a choice.
And so, Matt, there are two issues the former Prime Minister has covered with these comments overnight and this morning. One of them, as you mentioned, is in relation to the timing of the election. The second is in relation to this pre-selection dispute over New South Wales backbencher Craig Kelly. What's happening with that?
That's right, and this is the issue that really seems to have inflamed Malcolm Turnbull there. He has. This is why he took to social media last night and made some comments, and then went and did some morning media interviews today. He was made aware of plans, an intervention by Scott Morrison and some of his supporters to call on the New South Wales state executive of the Liberal Party to vote on using their extraordinary powers to effectively cancel pre-selections, meaning that members would be re-endorsed for the next federal election. Now, Craig Kelly, the member for Hughes, is facing a tough pre-selection battle in his electorate. It's understood he could be under threat there because of a strong challenge from a more moderate candidate. Mr Kelly has faced criticism from some of his colleagues about the way in which he's handled his time in Parliament. In fact, some suggesting that he spends more time courting the media than he does connecting with his electorate and sharing views on various issues, most notably energy, that don't correlate with the views in his electorate there. So Malcolm Turnbull found out about this move. He said he took to Twitter and started saying that he was contacting members of the state executive, urging them to allow the usual pre-selection process to go ahead, particularly if the concern is that Craig Kelly was going to quit the Liberal Party and become an independent, move to the crossbench and help further undermine Scott Morrison and his government, a threat that Craig Kelly made last week. He's made similar threats over the previous months there. So Malcolm Turnbull said that he had every right to make this intervention, every right to reach out to state executive members because he is still a member of the New South Wales Liberal Party.
Liberal Party members in Hughes are entitled to have their say. I mean, how, and I might say Mr Kelly, for what it's worth, was a very strong advocate of party democracy. So surely he would be pleased to face a preselection.
The former Prime Minister speaking there just in the last hour or so in Point Piper in Sydney. And so, Matthew, this comes in the final sitting week of Parliament for 2018. What's happening on the policy front this week?
Now, I'm sure there'd be a lot of people at home hoping that we were talking more about policy rather than politics here, but there is quite a bit on the agenda for this final sitting week of Parliament. First and foremost is the government's encryption legislation, this latest plank of national security legislation that the government wants to get through Parliament before the end of the week. This would allow law enforcement agencies easier access to encrypted messages used on apps such as WhatsApp or Messenger as part of their investigations. Now, it's currently being considered by Parliament's powerful Intelligence and Security Committee. They are still scrutinising that bill, and the government says that they've had enough time. They need to make their findings and allow this to be brought on for a vote. Labor is very critical of that approach, arguing that the government is using national security as a political football, that they are undermining the bipartisanship of that very important committee. And they've said that they had an indication from the Attorney General, Christian Porter, that he was willing to compromise with them to potentially split this bill and pass some of it by the end of the week, so at least some of these new powers would be in place before the long summer break. The Attorney General, Christian Porter, was on the ABC's AM program this morning, and he said any suggestion that there's proof of such a negotiating tactic is news to him.
Well, I can't say to you that I know what they are talking about. What we have always said is that we are willing to negotiate these matters, and we stood willing to negotiate these matters. And then, as I noted to you, a letter was leaked out to the media and reported before it even hit my desk saying negotiations are off.
The Attorney General, Christian Porter, on AM this morning. Another issue that is likely to come on for debate is this decision or this new legislation about energy prices and this so-called big stick approach that the government is trying to take to force energy companies to lower their prices and act in a more competitive manner. The energy companies are pretty annoyed by this legislation that's been put forward, saying that it goes well beyond the realms of possibility and the realms of what should be done in this sector to enhance competitiveness. So that's likely to be presented to the Coalition party room tomorrow, and the Coalition does want that settled by the end of this week. There is a lot of heckling going across the political divide about that issue as well, and that's even before you start looking at any attempts that could be made to test Scott Morrison's minority in Parliament with any motions or referrals that come from Labor and the crossbench. So, Joe, it is going to be a very busy and very bitter end to the parliamentary sitting year.
And Matt, just on that last point, does the one that seems most likely to possibly pass is something that Kerryn Phelps or someone on the crossbench puts forward in relation to getting people off Manus and Nauru, at least for medical treatment in Australia?
That's right. We were expecting Dr. Phelps to introduce that bill today. We understand that she she's not well, so she might not actually be doing that today. But it is one of the key pieces of legislation that could be brought on for debate as part of that testing of the numbers, trying to capitalise on the weakened position that the Morrison government find themselves in. If Dr. Phelps can get the support of Labor to bring on that sort of bill, there are a lot of procedural motions that have to happen before we get to that stage. Yep. But that is one of the key pieces of legislation and key policy issues that we will be looking out for in this final week.
Yep. Okay, Matt Doran reporting there from Canberra.